Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting edition of Boyographic, the show in which I, Matt the Gameboy, take you through the highs and lows of the Game Boy library, one cart at a time. This week we'll be looking at a Nintendo original. It's Solar Striker. As a designer and lover of the Nintendo Game Boy, I've often wondered about the design philosophy of Gunpei Yokoi. The one-time Nintendo electrician turned toy designer saw to the creation of many a product in the Nintendo portfolio, helping to define the company as it made its transition from traditional to digital toys. He's heralded as both the father of the Game & Watch and Game Boy, but after reading an interview with Satoru Okada, Yokoi's at the time assistant manager in Nintendo's coveted R&D 1 department, I for the first time had to pause to reflect if the games we got on my favourite handheld were anything like Yokoi envisioned. Okada, who would in all fairness go on to become a legend in his own right, brought to light in a 2017 interview with Retro Gamer magazine that Yokoi's vision for the Game Boy was very different from the console we know today. Okada claims that while he saw the Game Boy as a portable version of R&D 2's family computer, Yokoi himself saw the Game Boy closer to Milton Bradley's Microvision, a way of evolving the Game & Watch from a standalone experience into a system with interchangeable cartridges. Okada eventually wore his superior down, emphasising the need to get third-party developers on board and supplying them with the correct documentation to make games for the system, something Yokoi would himself go on to say was paramount to the success of the system. However, armed with this information, that the Game Boy's inception lied not in the idea of a portable Famicom, but in the evolution of the Game & Watch, one can look upon the first games Nintendo created for the system through a slightly different lens. One that also makes me think I was a little bit too harsh on alleyways also, but that's another story. As fans of the channel will know, I'm a big fan of shmups, even if I'm not always too great at them. But one game I've always looked at with a degree of skepticism was Nintendo's own Solar Striker. A rare genre for Nintendo to tackle, this vertical scrolling shooter has been a game I pick up and play every now and again, die horribly a couple of times on the third stage, and simply turn it off to play something else. You see, Solar Striker is a very simple game that ramps up in difficulty faster than you can swear at it in frustration. Not an uncommon trait in shmup design for sure, but one I'd argue probably turns away most people who plop the cart into their console. But stay with me, as I honestly think I'm in love with this game. The game itself is very straightforward. You pilot the Solar Striker, the last hope of humanity against the planet Turin Reticulons in the English localization, flying through 6 levels filled with enemy fighters and end-level bosses in order to save the human race. Of course, you're not told any of this up front or at all in the game. You see a title screen, press start, and go, launching headfirst not only into humanity's offensive against the Turin, but into one of the most memorable pieces of music in the whole system's back catalogue. As a co-development with Minakuchi Engineering, the folks who would go on to give the Game Boy its excellent Mega Man titles, the bar is of course set rather high for the game's expected quality level. But just like Nintendo, Minakuchi were just cutting their teeth with the system. So while the gameplay itself is very tight, well, the sprite work isn't quite on par with what you see alongside the Blue Bomber, but a lot of the enemies will statically scroll towards you or in an arched pattern. Oddly, the screen also scrolls to the left and right a little, perhaps to make the playing field a little less claustrophobic, but it offers very little in terms of strategy. But I digress. What's really important here is the tight gameplay. As well, it's a shmup. The control of your ship is super responsive, and although you can only have 3 projectiles on screen at a time, they'll whiz by fast enough that it's not really an issue. There are of course ways to upgrade your projectiles. Every now and again, a static enemy will fly down the middle of the screen, and by destroying it, you'll be able to grab a pickup to alter your attack speed and strength. The first pickup upgrading your attack type, while the second one allows you to fire faster. By the time you've got 6 power-ups, you'll be shooting 2 fast lasers that pretty much one-shot any ship you come across. However, dying in the line of duty will see knocked down to the previous plateau of weapons without the speed. This can be a tricky proposition, as while Nintendo didn't feel the need to strip you of all your power-ups entirely, you can find yourself quickly overwhelmed in the latter half of the game if you can't fire at least a triple shot. What makes matters worse is that unlike Gradius or R-Type, these pickups come at set intervals in the stage, meaning you can't luck into them, and heaven forbid you die right before one, as that's truly something worth screaming about. As you progress to the end of the stage, you also have a boss battle to deal with. It has to be said that besides the end boss, I found these encounters relatively straightforward, and as long as you know the enemy patterns, you can generally beat them with little difficulty. The odd thing in Solar Striker is, though, that some of the boss encounters can be treated as optional. After a certain amount of time, some bosses will simply just fly off and leave you without their points. It almost made me want to try a pacifist run of the game, but well, to be honest, I don't think it's possible. There are also some mini-bosses halfway through some stages, though again, their patterns are pretty easy to memorise, and they run away after a certain amount of attacks. By killing these bosses, not to mention various ships flying around the stages, you'll gain points. Each 50,000 will see you end up with a shiny new extra spaceship, allowing you to hold on just a little bit longer. But be warned, there are no continues, no extra lives to collect, and when you die, you die. Game over. Throwing you right back to the title screen to press start and try again. But this is the beauty of Solar Striker, and it loops back around to what I was saying at the start of the episode. While I've seen several reviewers criticise the game because Nemesis came out a month later and was a way better game, they're missing the point. Sure, objectively, Nemesis handles a few things better than Nintendo's efforts, but that's just because Nintendo hadn't intended to make a game the way Konami had. Solar Striker was never meant to be a home console version of an arcade experience. It was designed to be the next generation of Game & Watch. The simplicity of the animation, the 2 lives granted to the player with a harsh game over penalty, hell, even the screen you get for beating the game, all point to the experience having one purpose. Like a Game & Watch, you're meant to replay it over and over again, mastering it completely, knowing each enemy's attack pattern inside out, learning them not only by their sprites, but by the noises they make upon impact. After triumphing over the game, just like a Game & Watch's Game B option, you can replay the game again at a harder difficulty, increasing the number of sprites and the ferocity of their attacks by pressing the select button at the start menu. Here, the game does admittedly tear and slow down a little under the strain, but it's pretty ambitious that they tried to do something so fast in those early days. Comparing Solar Striker to Nemesis is a very surface level thing to do. Too often, as both creators and critics, we compare 2 executions together as if they were created side by side in a lab, saying this one is better than that one because of X, Y, and Z. Very rarely do we sit down and ask ourselves, what was the intent of this piece, and did it succeed in doing it? As a gamer, I think I'd tell you that Solar Striker is a fun game, built to be a pick-up-and-play style shooter, perfect for squeezing a game or 2 in on the commute to work before getting on with your day. It's not the most ambitious shooter on the system, both in terms of pushing the hardware or bringing something new to the genre, but what I will say is that the game is incredibly fair. Each death is through your own poor flying, not from a cheap shot on behalf of the developer, making the swift difficulty curve all the more rewarding to conquer. But as a designer, I would say that Solar Striker is an almost perfect execution to the brief, what would a Game & Watch game be if we weren't limited to a fixed number of segments and the refresh rate of a cheap LCD. Sure, visually, the sprites don't quite pack the charm of Octopus or Fire, but just as the designers of the earlier Game & Watch's games embraced that art style to complement the resolution of those screens, so too did the designers of Solar Striker for the Game Boy. But that's beside the point. For me, Solar Striker feels exactly like playing a Game & Watch. It's quick fun that uses speed and timing to test a gamer's reflexes without relying on cheap gimmicks. But alas, this is not how we review games. We can talk about authorial intent and the decisions taken by the designers until we're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, we simply want to know, am I going to enjoy this game? And while it's completely subjective, it's an undeniably fair question. I'd say if you like a challenge, have the patience to keep playing a game to get better at it over time, and like the shooter genre, then Solar Striker is probably a game worth looking into. If you're looking for something that tried to push the genre or the hardware forward, however, the Game Boy has other titles to titillate you. While I feel like playing and reviewing this game has put me one step closer to understanding a man I greatly admire, I hope, if nothing else, this video has informed you of whether or not you're going to shoot off to your nearest retro gaming boutique or steer clear of an undeniable classic. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Boyographic, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, and like this direction to reviewing something, then please let me know down in the comments below. And until next week, Game Boys and Girls, it's time for me to say, game on.